tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size. Whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the sixth part of, What If Harry Potter Meets Rwby? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Vale was nothing more than a war zone as the city was invaded by the hordes of Grimm. Adlesian Knight 200s were firing at the dark creatures while hunters and huntress in training or not were equally trying to prevent the Grimm to go further into the city. In the middle of this chaos, civilians were seen running away to escape the hordes of dark creatures. Ashbin, Glinda, Crow, and the rest of the Beacon staff were fighting the Grimm near Beacon Academy while Gyra Belladonna, his wife and their soldiers were protecting some citizens from the invaders. Ironwood and his own soldiers were engaged in a terrible fight against not only the creatures of Grimm but some Bloodfang thugs who appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the crisis. Harry, Blanche, Ruby, Amber, Penny, Emerald, and the entire of Team JNPR were fighting side by side against a large group of Grimm, preventing them from going no further into the city. It was not easy feat considering the number of enemies but they stood their grounds. From time to time, Harry would use his semblance but the Grimm would still come back. Why? Because it was all an act orchestrated by both Salem and Thanatos. The Grimm would not attack anymore except Taurus and his men but would still act like their normal selves. Yes, they will attack people but won't try to kill them like they usually do. Back to present, our hero used his right sword to strike an upcoming Borbatusk before using his left one to behead a charging Beowulf. Once the dark werewolf-like Grimm died, Harry allowed a cheeky grin to grew on his face as he turned his head to stare at his comrades. "Hey guys! 91 already," he shouted loudly to them with a grin before ducking as a Beowulf pounced on him. "What? No fair. I'm only on 57. Ruby said with a pout as she used crescent rose to slash into a Beowulf. "Ha! I'm ahead of you, Red. I'm on 59 here." Nora cried out as she slammed her hammer down, literally crushing a Borbatusk under it. 69 here. Pyrrha answered from her place as she impaled a Beowulf with her javelin. "I'm not too far away from you, love. I'm on 87. Blanche retorted not too far away from him with a toothy smirk as she used her blade to not only slash into an upcoming apathy but also beheading a charging Beowulf. It's not supposed to be a competition. Emerald, John, Penny and Ren all cried out at the same time as they defended themselves against some creatures of Grimm. "It is supposed to be one." Harry shouted back with a grin. "Harry, watch out." Amber cried out while pointing at something behind him. "Huh." Turning around, he came face to face with a charging Alpha Beringel. "Uhu sht." Our hero cried out in surprise before jumping away as the large Beringel lunged at him with a raised fist to strike him. Thankfully, its punch missed and met ground instead of flesh. Using this moment to his advantage, Harry hit the Beringel in the face with an elbow before jumping and striking it in the face with one of his swords. The gorilla-like Grimm roared in pain but before it could react, our hero lunged at it before slashing its neck with a battle cry. The Alpha Beringel roared in agony before falling heavily on the ground to never wake up again. Harry, climbed down the large beast's back before facing his friends again with a smirk of triumph on his face. For a few seconds nothing was said until Ruby hissed at him with slight annoyance, "It still counts as one." "Sure, Little Red Hood," Harry retorted with a snort before quickly turning around to stab a Beowulf, whose left paw was raised in the air to strike him, right in the chest. A moment later, Nora killed the last creature of Grimm in their spot and they could all sigh in relief for a moment, using their momentum to catch their breaths. "Guys? Is it me or are the Grimm all heading toward Beacon?" Ren asked everyone with a raised brow as he noticed a pack of Beowulfs heading toward the academy. They came from another area than theirs if you are wondering where they came from. It is not just you, man. John replied back while using his sword to avoid falling on the ground in exhaustion. I don't want to be that type of person, but who is protecting the school? Emerald asked them all as she stood side by side with Amber. They all blinked at the question before wide eyes of terror started to appear on some of the faces present. We must go back to Beacon. Ruby cried out in alarm as she thought about her sister Yang and possibly the rest of her teammates. Then go. I will hold them off. Harry declared with narrowed eyes as he glared at the wave of Grim heading toward them. Are you mad? Amber, Emerald and Blanche, along with Ruby, John and Pyrrha cried out to him with wide eyes of disbelief and surprise. Ren nodded in agreement to his comrade's words while Nora was readying her hammer, looking at the upcoming Grim with a cocky smirk on her face. Well, I'm not totally sane, so maybe I am. Harry replied with a cheeky grin before his expression turned serious as he added. Now go. We will not let you fight alone. Blanche snarled at him in anger and concern clear on her face as she stared at the man she loves. Yeah. We are friends and friends stick together. Amber retorted with a fierce expression on her face and around her, many nodded their heads in agreement. The others need you all, you must go help them, Harry told them in a serious tone even if deep down he was touched by how much they cared about him. I can't leave you, Blanche whispered as she stepped closer to him with an expression of pure concern and worry for him. Harry smiled sadly at her as he used his hands to cuff her head before saying as their noses touched one another. I know, love, but you have too. If the academy falls, everyone will fall into despair and panic. We must stop this from happening, our hero explained to her in gentle but stern tone. Behind him, he could hear the footsteps of the coming wave of Grim heading their way. Blanche looked into his eyes, clearly hesitating, and behind her, the rest of the group looked unsure of what they should do, leaving him alone or heading to Beacon to prevent the Grim from taking it over. You must go now. I promise to come after you once I'm done here, Harry told them in a kind tone. You promise? Ruby asked him with the cute puppy eyes. Smiling tenderly at the youngest girl present, Harry ruffled the top of her head, earning himself a small whine from the girl before answering gently. I promise. You better, otherwise I will make sure you will be in a world of pain and suffering. Amber hissed at him with narrowed eyes. Like him, she had to play the part to avoid suspicions. Rolling his eyes at the Fall Maiden, who so far hadn't used her special abilities before, hurriedly saying to them, Yeah, I promise I will catch up. Now stop worrying about me and go. Amber nodded at him before she rushed away toward the academy, quickly followed by her lover. Ruby shot one last glance toward him before going after them, quickly followed by the entirety of Team JNPR. Pyrrha and John shot him look that seemed to scream, be careful, while Nora was Nora. Make sure Tio breaks some legs, she cried out as she ran beside her partner and best friend, Ren, who nodded at Harry before running away from there. Blanche was the only one still standing there, her yellow eyes looking at the man she loved more than anything. A second later, she pulled him into a passionate kiss which he returned before pulling their lips away from one another. Be careful, love, you have to return to us, you must return to us, to me, the last word was said in a really soft tone. And I will, my appealing white wolf, Harry cooed at her before kissing her lips tenderly. Blanche smiled sadly at him and gave him one last kiss on the cheek before running after her friends, leaving him behind. Unseen to him, some tears were falling down her cheeks as her heart hurt like hell. I don't think I need to tell you why. See you later, love, he whispered softly as he watched her dashing away toward Beacon Academy. For a second or two, our hero stood there, unmoving until a chorus of growls echoed from behind him. Sighing deeply by the nose, Harry slowly turned around to face a large horde of Grim which had stopped in their tracks as they stared at him with their red eyes. Our hero stood there, watching the dark creatures with a neutral expression on his face as he swung his swords, clanking the blades together. After taking a deep breath, Harry raised his head to the sky as he opened his mouth to release a loud cry that echoed throughout the street just as a darkish aura-like fire started to surround his body. Along the fire and cry, came another thing, the feeling of coldness and power radiating from him. Instantly, every single creatures present around him froze in both fear and terror as he used his semblance to keep the creatures of Grimm at bay. But he only used it for a second as he could feel the presence of someone meters away from him. With a battle cry, he lunged forward, his swords ready to bring chaos and destruction to the enemies standing before him. Who was that person watching? Blanche Moonflower. The white wolf fauness had stopped following the others at some point and turned her head to look at the love of her life as he used his semblance, intimidation, on the dark creatures swarming in front of him. Thanks to the distance she had between him and her, she was safe from his semblance's effects. She gasped in shock when she saw him charging the invaders and was about to rush there to help him but was stopped by someone. Blanche. Come on. It was Amber. But I have to help him. The wolf fauness objected to her friend as she tried to free herself from the other girl's grip. He can take care of himself. Besides, he is far too stubborn to die. Amber told her hurriedly as she took glance at Harry, seeing him, slashing there and right, defeating some Grimm with his swords. Blanche wanted to protest but had to admit that Amber was right. Harry might be younger than her but he was a fierce, skilled and talented fighter with a temper that matched his skills. Nodding at her friend, the white wolf fauness shot one last glance toward the love of her life before the two girls rushing away toward Beacon. Thanks to his power, Harry could feel that whoever was watching him was no more in the area and sighed in relief. The creatures of Grimm, who were all attacking him a second ago, all backed away from him, bowing at him. Find Adam Taurus and his minions and have some fun with them, Harry ordered them with a smirk, and the dark beasts all nodded their heads before dashing away to find the Bloodfang members. Chuckling darkly to himself, Harry then took a look around before rushing away to another part of the city to help some people. After all, if he returned too soon, it would be suspicious, so maybe he could make himself useful. Meanwhile, standing on a hill, Salem was watching her army causing chaos in the city of Vale. So far, her Grimm had not killed innocent lives yet, which was good. Sure, she felt a bit bad for scaring the people so much with her servants, but she couldn't risk Ojben or one of his followers to prevent her from using the relics. With a smirk, the Queen of Grimm then slowly made her way downhill, making her way toward the devastated city, followed by her SCRT of dark creatures. Time skip. Everywhere around Beacon Academy, various students and the entirety of the staff were engaged in a battle against the many creatures of Grimm. John was charging at an Ursa before delivering a slash that knocked it back, while Neon rollerbladed away from a Borbatusk that was charging her. Coco opened fire on a griffin as it landed on the ground, while Arslan was fighting an Ursa Major before it ran off to attack Nora, who shot it with her grenade launcher. Ren fired his guns at a retreating Beowulf who dropped dead after receiving the bullets. Pyrrha, Rwby, and Penny were teaming up to kill a rather big Deathstalker and a Beringel. Emerald and Amber were fighting side by side against a pair of Manticores. Blanche, was holding her ground against a really big Saber who was trying its best to claw her. Not too far, Weiss, Blake, Ojben, Glinda and Crow were fighting side by side to prevent the dark creatures to go even further in the academy. A part of the students and staffs of Beacon, things were being chaotic. Airships were firing against several Nevermores while some Atlesian soldiers were struggling against a rather large Deathstalker on the main avenue of Beacon. DMN. The more we kill, the more they come. John hissed loudly to everyone to hear as he pushed back a Beowulf with his shield. And even more are heading our way, look. Blake cried out as she pointed at something with her finger. The defenders all turned their heads toward where she was pointing before widening their eyes in horror as they saw a large amount of creatures of Grimm heading their way. No, he can't be, Blanche began to mutter in horror as tears slowly started to fall down her cheeks. What? Weiss asked her with some concern as she impaled a Beowulf with her rapier. Those Grimm, they came from where we left Harry, the white wolf fauness answered tearfully. Everyone stopped moving at those words as their eyes widened in shock. Sure, they knew Harry was somewhere in the streets, but to hear that those Grimm came from where he was last seen could only mean one thing. He can't be dead. Nora cried out as herself was at the edge of crying. Yeah, he is the strongest of us all. John added with a sad look on his face. Ruby looked ready to cry, but then her face showed nothing but determination as she looked at the tearful face of Blanche. Without warning, she used her semblance to rush away, much to the surprise of her comrades. Ruby, you dolt, where are you going? Weiss screamed out loudly to her teammate and partner as she slashed an apathy in two. Looking for Harry, was the younger girl's answer. I'm going after her. She is my partner after all. Weiss announced with determination, and Blake, who at first seemed hesitant, nodded at her before adding. I will go with you. Maybe along the way we will find my parents. Weiss nodded at her teammate before the two girls left the scene. Blanche, was on her knees, her face filled with nothing but despair as she thought of the man she loved more than anything, probably dead. Amber looked at her with sympathy and was about to approach her to comfort the clearly heartbroken Faunus when she saw a huge wave of Grimm approaching them. Upcoming, she cried out loudly to her allies as she readied herself. Seeing the upcoming enemies, Penny, Emerald, the members of Team SSSN who also decided to head to Beacon at some points, and Team JNPR formed a lineup to engage the charging invaders. John and Pyrrha exchanging a smile to each other before charging the horde of Grimm. Time skip. A few minutes after leaving Beacon Academy, Ruby jumped off a building to land on the ground. Just a moment ago, the leader of Team Rwby was fighting Mercury Black, who escaped prison during the Grimm's first arrival. The fight was heard, and in the end, the young man had beaten the disarmed Rose, chastening her for not seeing the world as it truly was, a world where only the strong survived, while claiming that all heroes dies. However, Ruby used this momentum to kick him in the stomach with her legs, causing him to back away from her while holding his middle section with pain. Mercury soon found himself bumping against something, and after turning to see what it was, he didn't have the time to react as he was swallowed whole by a griffin. Seeing the Grimm busy with its meal, Ruby reclaimed her scythe crescent rose before jumping off the building. Sighing deeply, she then went back to look for Harry, who so far had not been seen. Come on, where is he? She thought to herself as she turned into an alley, only to pause when she saw a familiar figure helping a man. Harry, she called out in joy, and she rushed toward him. It was indeed our hero, who was covered in dust and ashes but otherwise looked pretty well. Hey Ruby. What are you doing here? He asked her with a raised brow of confusion. I was looking for you. Blanche thinks you are dead. Blinking at the words, Harry smiled sadly at her before answering, thank you for your concern, but right now, I can't go back. People needs my help and I will be damned to not give them. Ruby looked at him for a moment before nodding her head in acceptance. You should go look for your sister. And maybe the rest of your teammates, Harry told her with a soft smile, and she nodded at him before dashing away, leaving him behind. Elsewhere at Beacon, the defenders, despite fighting bravely, were clearly losing grounds. Velvet groaned as she struggled to get back on her feet, only to get knocked back down when her teammate Coco bumped into her after getting knocked away by an Ursa. Neon Cat and Reese Chloris dodged and weaved between groups of students and Elysian Mechs fighting against a lot of Grimm, while the rest of Team ABRN were attacking a griffin with bullets and fireballs, as Bolin knocked a Beowulf aside while Reese spinned her board before slicing a Borbotusk as she passed by it. Nearby, Sun and Neptune tried their best to hold back a Beringel, while Nora and Ren decimated a large group of Apathy. Yatsuhashi Daichi, for his part, was fighting a griffin while Fox Alistair dashed over from a pile of robot parts. Two creeps rushed at Flint Cole, who used his trumpet to send the first one flying, while Neon and Reese used their weapons to freeze a Beringel's legs in place. Neptune, who was about to give the final blow to the Beringel, found himself being swatted aside by the Grimm's free arm. Neptune! Sun cried out to his teammate, called out as he reached a hand for him just as Yatsuhashi was knocked back by an alpha Beowulf who appeared out of nowhere. The dark werewolf-like Grimm then turned around toward a distracted Lai Ren before approaching him. Seeing this, Nora Valkyrie gasped in horror before running toward him as fast as she could. "Look out!" the orange-haired young woman yelled out in alarm to her teammate as she pushed him out of the way. Her action sure saved Ren from the Beowulf strike, but now it was her who was sent flying by the blow. Ren grunted as he fell on the ground, but then his eyes widened in horror as he saw his childhood friend's body tumbling in the ground not too far away from him. "Nora, no!" Ren shouted in horror as he reached out for her, only to get knocked back by the Beowulf. At the same time, Coco was firing her weapons at a large Berinjal, but the gorilla-like Grimm seemed completely unaffected by the shots. This is bad. Well, I guess now's a better time than any. Velvet," Coco began to say to herself before turning her head to call out a certain rabbit faunus who looked back at her with an excited look on her face. "Really?" Coco nodded at her while saying, "Just make them count." Velvet quickly nodded as she approached the Berinjal who roared at her. "What are you doing? She's going to get hurt." Amber cried out in disbelief and worry as she looked at the rabbit faunus, but the only response she got from Coco was, "Just watch," and watching she did. Velvet held her hand out as Anisadora started to glow to form a scythe, not any scythe but Ruby's scythe, Crescent Rose. The Fall Maiden gasped in surprise as behind her, Blanche and Emerald looked stunned. The trio watched as Velvet leaped into the air, dodging cannon fire as she imitated Ruby's spin before slashing at the Berinjal who roared in pain. Velvet, ignoring it, then replicated Myrtenaster Weiss's weapon much to the shock of Th3 to deflect the gorilla-like Grimm's punch and landing a few blows. Then the rabbit fauna surprised them again, but pushing it back with an imitation of Yang's fighting move. After landing a few shots, Velvet slided under the Berinjal's fist, similar to Blake as she used Gamble's shroud and used its string to trip over the Grimm, before moving to the Alpha Beowulf, who didn't have the time to react when Velvet beheaded him with a sword similar to John's. Unfortunately, she was so focused on the Alpha Beowulf that she didn't notice the Berinjal from earlier until it punched her from behind, resulting in her being sent flying away before landing on her back. "Velvet!" Coco called out worriedly as pulled out her weapon along with Neptune, Nadir, and Reese, but then, they all stopped when something unexpected happened. The Berinjal found itself being frozen as a sword that somehow came out of nowhere found its way through its neck. The massive gorilla-like Grimm heavily fell on the ground before dissipating. Behind it, stood a certain heiress we all love. "Weiss!" Velvet called out to the newcomer, who retrieved her weapon from the Berinjal's neck. "What are you doing here? I thought you were with Blake and Ruby." Emerald asked her from her place. "I couldn't follow this dolt with that semblance of hers. So I decided to come back to help. As for Blake, she is still looking for her parents," the heiress answered with a small shrug. Many nodded their heads in acceptance. When Ruby uses her semblance, it was impossible for them to follow her. Guys, we got a problem." Neptune, who had recovered from the Berinjal's blow, cried out as he pointed at something, and they all turned their heads to see a large Deathstalker heading toward them. "You have got to be kidding me." Sun replied with annoyance as he readied his weapon along with his comrades. But then a rather familiar blonde brawler appeared above the Deathstalker with a battle cry before punching the top of its head as hard as she could with her gauntlets. The Scorpion Grimm screeched in pain, and Yang raised a fist again before punching the open gap, which caused the Deathstalker to collapse with a screech of agony. That went better than expected," Sun commanded as he pulled down his weapon, quickly followed by the others as Weiss leaned against her weapon to keep herself standing. However, she was soon approached by a concerned Yang. "Weiss, you're okay? Have you heard from Ruby?" The Schnee heiress shook her head in response. She went to look for Harry. He had been missing for some time. The blonde, looking even more concerned, glanced around quickly before focusing back on Weiss. "What about Blake?" "She went to look for her parents," Weiss replied as she pointed toward it somewhere in the distance, probably where their teammate ran off. Yang nodded her head with a look of determination in her lilac eyes. "All right, you go look for Ruby, I will look for Blake." However, they barely made a few steps that someone called out to them. "Yang! Weiss! The two concerned along with Blanche and Amber turned their heads to see Blake approaching them with not only her parents Gyra and Callie Belladonna but also some Faunus guards. Blake. Weiss and Yang cried out in joy before the three members of Team Rwby embraced each other. Is everyone okay? Gyra asked the teenagers with concern before sighing in relief when everyone nodded at him. Students, someone called out and everyone turned their heads to see Ashbin, Glinda, Crow, and Ironwood. Don't ask me where he came from approaching them. Thanks gods you are all right, Ashbin muttered with relief after a quick glance at everyone. Where is Rwby? Crow asked them with concern in his voice. We don't know, we got separated. Yang replied back as she looked around in panic. I'm fine Yang, came a really familiar voice. Swiftly, Yang turned her face to see her beloved younger sister approaching her. Rwby. The blonde girl of Team Rwby cried out in relief as she pulled her little sister into a bear-crushing hug while Rwby was struggling to escape. I'm happy to see you too sis, but quit it. The younger girl whined loudly as she trashed madly in her older sister's arms while around the two, everyone was staring at them with amusement. Where is Harry? Amber asked the younger girl with concern as she didn't saw him with her. Behind her, Blanche was looking at Rwby expectantly. The white wolf Faunus wouldn't bear to lose the man she loved. I saw him earlier. He was helping some people. Rwby's answer caused many to sigh in relief. He is not one to die easily, John responded with a chuckle. Sorry to be that guy, but shouldn't we chase the Grim away? Crow inquired from his place as he glanced at everyone present. Right. They all cried out in response. Soldiers. Take the wounded to the nearest doctors. Gyra ordered some of his guards who nodded at him before approaching the few unconscious bodies on the ground, including Ren's and Nora's. Now everyone, it is time to take down the enemies once and for all. For Beacon. Ashbin cried out loudly while raising a hand in the air. The others all looked at him with glares and his fists descended. Despite them fighting, they did not forget what Salem had said earlier. The teenagers, along with Glinda, Crow, Callie, Gyra and Ironwood all glared at him for a moment before rushing into the streets with their weapons ready, leaving him behind. Ashbin sighed sadly as he should have expected it, but then quickly went after them. As long as he was alive, he would fight for the people of Remnant, knowing that now he had a lot to answer for. He hoped that they wouldn't be too hard on him for not only having told them nothing about his true identity but also for hiding the fact, humanity's greatest enemy was his former wife. Salem stopped her walk through the devastated streets of Vale before looking around. Her face showed nothing, but internally she felt a bit bad for allowing such a chaos to be. Sure, it was all for summoning the gods and to save humanity and Faunuskin from another great extinction by the hands of the gods, but the citizens didn't deserve that. If all of this had happened a decade ago, Salem wouldn't have cared for the lives of others, but thanks to Thanatos she felt human again. He had been a great help during all those years and she will never be able to thank him properly for that. Shaking her head to focus back on the present, the Queen of Grimm then resumed her walk, followed by her SCRT loyally following her. As she walked, she couldn't help but being excited as soon everything she had worked for will happen. The gods will be back and she will finally have her revenge against them. The thought of seeing the twin gods dying made her smirk darkly in pleasure. She couldn't wait for it. Elsewhere, Harry was also walking in the streets of Vale, helping some citizens from time to time or killing a Grimm for pleasure. Then he paused when he felt a strong presence a bit far away from his position. He recognized it as Salem's and quickly he decided to head toward her, knowing that his presence will be needed for the better or worse. Meanwhile, the battle was terrible and merciless as our heroes were killing the creatures of Grimm like no tomorrow. They were fighting like tigers and with the courage of lions. They showed no pity as they killed any creatures of Grimm unfortunate enough to be in their paths. They were soon joined by Professor Oblek and Port along with many other Atlesian soldiers and mechs. Everyone was watching the others back, protecting each other while engaging the dark creatures. It was no easy feat, but so far, they were doing good. Even Ashbin was being protected. While everyone hated him now, they didn't want him to die so soon as he had a lot of things to answer for. Glinda, Ironwood, Crow, Peter, Oblek and some of the other adults hadn't stopped glaring at him whenever they had the chance to, and not chance did he try to say anything, knowing that if he does, things would be even worse for him. The teenagers, for their parts, were also glaring at him, but their attention were more focused on the creatures of Grimm attacking them from all sides. Regardless of the tensions, they were courageously holding their grounds against countless of enemies. Why were they so many Grimm heading their ways? Because of the dark emotions radiating from them, mainly anger and distrust. However, despite their bravery, they were still outnumbered, and some of them clearly were showing exhaustion because of all the fighting. It is the end, isn't it? Amber asked her comrades in a soft tone. It seems so, Emerald responded to her lover with the same tone as they stood side by side. It was a pleasure to meet you guys. Ruby said to everyone present as she held crescent rose in her hands. We know, the teenagers all responded to her as themselves were tightening their hold on their weapons. Children, don't start being pessimistic. We can still win this. Crow admonished them while using his scythe to kill a charging Beowulf. But uncle, we are clearly outnumbered. Yang retorted to him before punching an apathy in the face. She is right. We won't be able to hold our ground forever. Blake hissed in agreement to the blonde's words. And some of us are starting to feel tired here. John declared as he panted a bit, which caused Pyrrha to shoot him a look of concern. Have faith, young ones. Surely something will happen. Gyra told the children in a kind tone. Barely a few seconds after he said those words, battle cries and sounds of shot could be heard echoing in the air, and they all turned their heads toward the docks. That where the sounds came from. Much to their shocks and delight, a small army of Elysian soldiers along with soldiers from the White Fang charged the creatures of Grimm. The defenders felt hope entering their chests. Here was reinforcement. By Alm. Where did they came from? John cried out in shock at the newcomers who started killing Grimm left and right. I don't know, but I'm happy to see them. Weiss responded to the blonde leader of Team JNPR. Let's hope they will leave some Grimm for us. Yang said to her comrades with a little grumble. Before anyone could answer the brawler, someone approached them. General, one of the Elysian soldiers approached Ironwood before bowing at him. Captain, what are you doing here? The general asked him, unable to hide his surprise and happiness at seeing them. Mrs. Schnee sent us out to help you against the Grimm. Thank you, Mom, Weiss whispered with relief and happiness when she heard this. And we were sent by Sienna Khan to help as well. A fox Faunus added as he went to stand next to the Elysian captain. I will have to thank Sienna for her unexpected help, Gyra said to himself, but his wife heard him. We will, Callie whispered to him gently, and her husband shot her a warm smile. Suddenly a chorus of growl caught everyone's attention, and they turned their heads to see a large horde of Grimm heading straight to them. Quickly regaining his composure, Ironwood reunited what remained of his army, who stood side by side with the White Fang soldiers of Sienna before he and Gyra ordered loudly at the same time. Fire! At those words, all soldiers fired their weapons at the incoming Grimm, who fell under the bullets and fireball. The students also joined in, and then Ironwood rose an arm before bellowing loudly. Charge! With a battle cry, the Atlas soldiers and what remained of his androids charged forward, engaging the Grimm just as Gyra ordered his own troops to attack. For Vale! Blanche screamed loudly before rushing forward, followed by the rest of her comrades and the beacon staff. Despite their numbers, the fight was not easier, but they were gaining grounds. The creatures of Grimm were falling under their blows like flies. In the middle of the fight, Professor Port and Oblek could be seen laughing while stating that it was the greatest battle they ever knew. We are taking back the city. Ojben shouted as he shot at an incoming griffin, as around him it was nothing but chaos. Shut up, Ojben! Crow snarled at the headmaster before Ironwood took over by saying sternly. Once we deal with the Grimm, we will deal with you. Ojben sighed deeply, but then focused back on present as a Borbotusk charged him from his right. No words were exchanged afterwards, and the only things you could hear in the air were the cries of agony, pain, anger from the fighters, both grim or not. The next few minutes were in short, not only intense but long, or appeared to be. Many of the defenders thought they had been fighting for hours now, because each time a creature of grim died, two more took its place. It seemed endless, an infernal loop. Legion soldiers and White Fang members were shooting again and again against the waves of grim charging them. The androids were among the first ones to fall because of the sheer number of dark creatures. Even with the reinforcements Willow Schnee and Sienna Khan sent to help them, they were still being outnumbered. It was a 2 against 12 fight type. Because of that, many were quickly showing signs of exhaustion, and some could be seen having sweats pouring down their faces or taking deep breath. "If only Harry was with us," Rwby said as she used crescent rose to behead a pouncing Beowulf. "Yes. We are in great need of his semblance right now," Young added while nodding in agreement to her sister's words as she punched a griffin on the head. "Hate to say it, but he is not here," Emerald cried out as she killed a Borbatusk. "I have to agree with her on that," Crow retorted as he was fighting a feet or two away from the green-haired thief. Many had seen Crow shooting suspicious looks at Emerald for several days even now, but they brushed it aside as unimportant. He clearly distrusted her for some reason, so to hear him saying that was shocking. "I just hope he is all right wherever he is now," Blanche said loudly at first before her soft softened in the end. Amber shot her friend a look of sympathy before she had to focus back on the fight as a Deathstalker entered the fray. It didn't take long for Professor Port, Glinda and Oblek to kill it, but it was an exhausting task even for them. Suddenly, as if the universe took pity of them or answered their silent plea, the air suddenly felt a bit colder, but enough to make everyone pause a bit. The creatures of Grimm all stopped moving when the feeling of coldness first appeared, which caused both humans and faunas to stop what they were doing as well. "Guys, can it be?" Blake loudly asked her comrade with a bit of hope in her eyes. "It must be him," Rwby and Young both said at the same time with joy on her face. "No one else could make the air turn so cold," Weiss added with a tiny smile on her face, her hand still wrapped around the hilt of her rapier. Blanche, suddenly looked like she was about to cry out in happiness as she looked around to find the source of the cold feeling in the air, only to pause after she noticed a shadow standing at the top of a building. The figure belonged to a young man with middle-long black hair, shining emerald green eyes, and a well-built figure who was wearing a sleeveless turtleneck, dark gray top, white long sleeves underneath, long black fingerless gloves on, and black leather boots. His attire was topped by a black hooded cloak fastened to his shoulders by cross-shaped pins. Dangling at his sides were a pair of sharp dual swords. She recognized him instantly, Harry James Potter, the love of her life. "Harry!" She cried out in joy as she looked at him, and hearing this, everyone stared at where she was looking at. "Harry!" Team JNPR and Team RWBY both cried out in relief and happiness at the same time. Glinda Goodwitch released a deep sigh of relief at seeing her student fine and relatively unharmed. Ashben looked just as relieved. Ironwood, had a stern look on his face. Gyra and Callie Belladonna seemed happy to see him well, knowing that their daughter was friend with him. "Well, if I knew I would be welcomed this way, I would disappear more often," Harry cried out with a cheeky grin on his face. "You took you sweet time," Amber shouted loudly with a hint of frustration on her face, while beside her, Emerald nodded in pure agreement. "It's good to see you, Amber. Sorry about that, I had to deal with Taurus and some of his goons on the way there," Harry replied with a shrug as if it was no big deal. Many faunas blinked at those words before Gyra asked him, "And where are they now?" "Dead, killed by Grimm." It was fun to see Taurus being gutted by a saber, though. Harry's casual response caused many to think of his sanity. "Harry?" "Yes, Blakey?" Blake Belladonna's left eye twitched slightly at the nickname, but ignored both him and the snickers behind her to ask him, "How do you know Taurus?" Blinking, Harry then internally groaned as he accidentally let it slip. "A little birdie told me," he replied with a hesitant grin. Many stared blankly at him, but then they realized that the Grimm were now growling at them because Harry had accidentally stopped using his semblance. A little help here maybe? Pyrrha cried out as a manticore roared at her. I don't know, it's pretty fun to watch you all fight. Wish I had some popcorns though, Harry answered in mock consideration at first before sighing deeply in fake sadness. Harry/Mr. Potter. Team Rwby, JNPR, Amber, Emerald and Blanche cried out at the same time just as Glinda, Port, Oblek, Ojben and Ironwood called out to him as well. Alright, I'm coming. Geez, last time I tried to joke. Harry said loudly at first before muttering the last time to himself. Our hero then surprised everyone by tossing his swords into the air while he kneeled down. Suddenly, he jumped as high as he could, grabbing each swords in his hands before twirling around in a tornado of blades just as he stood right above a group of Beowulfs. The second he came down, the sheer impact of his landing creating a shockwave that sent the werewolves like Grimm flying across the grounds. Harry then casually straightened up before using a hand to brush his left shoulder as if he was getting rid of some dirt on it. Once it was done, he looked back at his friends, teacher and love of his life only to see them staring at him in shock. What? He asked them with a curious raised brow. That was cool. Ruby cried out with stars in her eyes. That was rather impressive, Pyrrha and Weiss both commented at the same time, which caused them to stare at each other in surprise. How did you call this move? Young asked him with a smirk as her hands were on her peach. I call it the dancing blades. Pretty nice up. Harry asked with a cheeky grin that caused Glinda's left eye to twitch in annoyance. How she hated that expression of his. While this is rather impressive, Mr. Potter, we have to focus on the Grimm, Ojben began to say in his professional tone only to be interrupted by our hero who sneered at him in response. A sneer Severus Snape would be proud of now that he thought about it. Grimm created by your own ex-wife if what we heard earlier is any indications. At those words, many started to glare at Ojben who had the decency of looking down in shame, trying his best to avoid looking at anyone in the eyes. And speaking of the Grimm, they are not moving anymore. Harry's new words caused everyone to blink in surprise before looking around. Sure enough, the creatures of Grimm were still there but weren't moving anymore, their red eyes looking at them, following their movements but made no move to attack. What was going on here? Why aren't they moving? John asked his comrade as he looked at a Beowulf that was standing 3 feet away from him. I don't know, I never saw such a thing before, Pyrrha answered to him as she eyed the other Grimm with her hands still wrapped around her weapons. They were attacking us a moment ago and now they are doing nothing, Gyra commented the obvious as his eyes scanned their enemies with suspicion. Soldiers. Keep your weapons at the ready in case they move again. Ironwood ordered his men who all pointed their rifles at the dark creatures crying loudly. Sir, yes sir. Harry rolled his eyes at this but then yelped when a rather angry-looking white wolf faunus slapped the back of his head. Ow. Geez, what was that for? He asked her with pain and slight anger as he rubbed the spot where she slapped him. That was for make more worry about you and this. Blanche began to say with narrowed eyes and barred teeth before lunging forward to kiss him passionately on the lips. This is for keeping your promise, Blanche whispered the last part as she briefly pulled her lips away from his. Of course once she finished talking, she kissed him again full force which he wholeheartedly returned. At the sight, many turned their heads away, either to give them their privacy or because they were disgusted by it. Come on, get a room you two. John cried out with a groan while Young quickly hid Ruby's eyes with her hands, much to the latter's annoyance. Seriously? Now of all times? Amber cried out with some annoyance while beside her Emerald voiced her agreement. There were places and times for such kisses or display of affection. Blanche and Harry maintained the kiss for a few seconds before pulling away, smiling at one another. Then in perfect synchronization, they faced the others before sticking their tongues out at them. Ruby snickered a bit at the sight while the others either rolled their eyes at the childish acts or chuckled in amusement. But sadly, the moment was kinda broken when a familiar voice echoed from nearby. I hope I am not interrupting anything important. Turning their heads, everyone stared in shock and horror except Amber, Emerald and Harry for known reasons as stepping out of a line of Grimm, appeared the Dark Queen, Salem. She had an amused smile on her face as she gazed at them with her red eyes. As she stood in front of a large manticore, the defenders minus Harry and Emerald pulled out their weapons before pointing them at the newcomer. Salem. Ojben snarled out in a hostile tone as he took a step forward, glaring daggers at the Queen of Grimm, whose red eyes landed on the old man. Ojben, how lovely to see you again after so long, Salem began to say in a sweet tone filled with slight sarcasm before adding with a smirk. Or maybe I should call you by your true name, Ozma. Hearing this, Ojben snarled at her with a face twisted with anger. You have some nerves coming here, you monster. Because of you, humanity had been at the brink of extinction. You killed our daughters in cold blood and you slaughtered thousands of people in your stupid quest for power. Salem's calm face darkened a bit at those words and Harry could see a faint tear falling down one of her cheeks. Humanity had been wiped out because of the gods. They didn't support it, seeing their creations turning against them. Yes, I killed our daughters, but it was an accident. You tried to take my babies away from me. And I did slaughter people, but it was you who sent them to kill me despite knowing they stood no chance against me. Hearing, many people stared at Ojben with anger and fury. The creatures of Grimm growled and roared as they felt the dark emotions coming from the defenders. But neither Ojben nor Salem, nor everyone else present cared about it. If I remember correctly, you were the one who brainwashed everyone so they opposed the gods. If you hadn't, none of this would have happened. The headmaster of Beacon snarled at his ex-wife with anger and hatred. Those gods are nothing more than tyrants, Ozma. They want to control us, not guide us. The second you step out of line, they will destroy everyone in sight. Salem hissed back in anger while gesturing for the Grimm to not move from their position. We must respect our creators. They are gods. Immortal and powerful beings beyond measures. Ojben said back with a glare that caused many to step a step back. Harry snorted from his place and Blanche shot him a questioning glance. Nothing is immortal and I'm gonna prove it right here and now. Salem said coldly as she used her powers to summon the artifacts everyone saw on the screens earlier. Ironwood, Glinda and Crow all gasped while the others were all watching the artifacts with confusion clear on their faces. For those who don't know what they are, I present you artifacts, relics by the God of Light himself. Their purpose? Once united, they would summon the gods back on Remnant. Salem declared loudly to everyone. Whose eyes widened, especially the youngsters, at those words. Salem. Listen to me, if you summon the gods now, Remnant will know another great extinction. Ojben told his wife with worry now, and Harry noticed that the headmaster was slowly reaching out for his cane, causing him to narrow his eyes at the man. The people present minus Amber, Emerald and Harry were wondering what the old man meant by this statement and looked back and forth between the headmaster of Beacon and the Queen of Grimm. They all flinched when Salem allowed a dark smirk to grew on her face as her red eyes looked at her former love. Oh, they won't be able to, because I have a little surprise for them. What surprise? Ojben asked her with narrowed eyes. No, it would be telling, was her answer with a mischievous grin on her face. Harry retained himself from chuckling in amusement at the annoyance visible on Ojben's face, but then looked back at the Queen of Grimm. Turning her back to the man she once loved, Salem's attention was now on the relics, who was now levitating before her very eyes. Soon she started talking to a language even Harry didn't recognize, and they all saw the relics slowly being covered in a bright aura-like light. Seeing this, Ojben seemed to turn more and more pale as he was now holding his cane as if it was a sword, his eyes looking at Salem with an expression of alarm, fear, determination, and gravity. Harry, seeing this, also prepared his swords while keeping his eyes on the man. I will not let you destroy humanity again. The headmaster of Beacon shouted loudly in alarm and fear as he lunged forward with his cane at the ready. Salem lazily looked above her right shoulder to stare at him with a calm expression on her face, as if unaffected by the fact Ojben was charging her. She watched as the headmaster of Beacon's cane looked ready to reach her. Clank. Only for something to prevent it from touching her. Many gasped at what they saw, and even Ojben looked absolutely stunned when he saw one of his own students blocking his cane with a stern expression on his face. Mr. Potter, he cried out in surprise and shock as he stared at the young man with same expressions. Harry, however, didn't respond as he effortlessly pushed the headmaster back. Now standing right in front of Salem in a protective manner, Harry now looked at everyone with a cold expression on his face. Glancing over his shoulder, he met Salem's eyes before the two of them nodded at one another, much to the shock of everyone's watching minus Amber, of course. "Harry, what are you doing?" Young asked him with anger as her lilac eyes turned red. "Why are you helping her?" Weiss asked him, equally angry but also stunned beyond relief. Blanche was looking at him with betrayal, denial and horror as her yellow eyes were locked on him. Harry looked at her for a second, his expression showed nothing but pain and resignation before his gaze hardened. Using a bit of his power, his body soon found itself covered in a darkish aura, giving the others the impression that he was a living shadow with only his eyes shining brightly in an emerald green light. In addition, he clanked his blades together and the sound echoed in the air. Right now he looked like a demon, ready to fight. Ashbin was unable to move as he looked at the young man with shock. He had not expected one of his own students to ally himself with his nemesis. But then everyone looked away from Harry as the relics started to spin madly in the air, forming what looked like a circle before they shot toward an open space. Everyone watched with fascination as the circle turned into what looked like a door made of light. "It is over, we are doomed," Ashbin whispered to himself in defeat when two figures appeared out of the portal. The first one was yellow in color and was pretty, a tall and muscular appearance with deer antlers on his head, while the second figure was purple and had a much leaner and slender build than the other and possessed ram horns on his head instead of antlers. Everyone looked at the two with shock and amazement, even Amber internally. She was also filled with resignation and anticipation. Salem's eyes shined in triumph for finally having achieved her goal, while Harry allowed a dark smirk to grow on his face. The twin gods were back on Remnant. Team Rwby, Team JNPR, Penny, Blanche, Amber, Emerald, Glinda, Crow, Peter, Oblek, Ironwood, Gyra, Callie and the many other people present were at loss for words. Around them, the creatures of Grimm whimpered as they backed away in fear. A part of whimpers and slow breathing, no sounds could be heard for a while as everyone watched the two newcomers who were human-sized with various expressions on their faces. Shock. Amazement. Terror. Stupor. Fear. Denial for some. Resignation in Ashbin's case. Triumph Salem's and Harry's case. Unknown to them all around Remnant, people were equally stunned by this. Hidden in the shadows, someone was recording the entire thing, and so everyone, no matter where you were, could clearly see the return of the gods. Many people, especially who didn't believe in their existence, were shocked to the core, their belief shattered in an instant. The defenders of Beacon were like everyone else. Especially the young ones. Blanche, however, was not only looking at the gods but at the man she grew to love terribly, Harry James Potter. She was still shocked of the fact he had saved Salem from Ashbin's attack a few moments ago. The White Wolf Faunus had been particularly taken aback when the two nodded at one another. It was as if they knew one another. Could it be possible that Harry had been working with the self-proclaimed Queen of Grimm this whole time? It seemed so because Harry stood protectively in front of Salem, looking at everyone challengingly while she used those relics to summon the very beings many had been doubting the existence of. However, Blanche did remember the look he had given her after he pushed the headmaster away with his blades, pain and sorrow. Thanks to the amount of time she passed with him, she knew why he gave her those looks. He was hurt for hiding this to her. She could understand why she wouldn't, but many questions were passing through her mind. Why would her lover would ally himself with the Queen of Grimm herself? What would he gain by helping her summoning the gods? There were questions without any answers, at least not yet. At the same time, Amber was sighing deeply in reluctant acceptance. The Fall Maiden knew that the gods would come back one day, and while she hadn't expected it to happen so soon, she knew that they were not turning back now. The truth will be revealed and the face of the world will be changed forever. Eyeing Blanche from the corner of her eyes, Amber couldn't help but feeling sympathetic toward her as she was about to learn the truth about the man she loved. About him not being a human being but a literal god in disguise. Shaking her head, she turned her head to look at the famous twin gods as one of them, the yellow one, started to speak. Remnant, it had been so long, don't you think so, brother? The god of light's voice was deep and resonant, filled with power. Indeed, brother, and it seems we have a welcoming party. The smaller deity, the god of darkness, answered in the same tone that his brother. Blanche and Amber could clearly hear the small sarcasm in the god's voice as his eyeless face turned toward them. It seems so, but is it me or am I seeing your creations? Surrounding us as well, the god of light asked his brother as he saw the lines of Grimm surrounding the area. It is not just you, brother, but why are they here? The god of darkness muttered with some surprise. It was as if the two were in their own little world, ignoring everyone right now. I bring them here. Salem's voice echoed from her place as she took a step forward with a glare on her face. The two gods turned their heads to look at her. Well, 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 isn't it the woman who defied us millenniums ago? The god of light inquired his brother with a tone similar to a sneer. It seems so, but she looks different, the god of darkness commented with a bit of surprise and interest. After you destroyed humanity, I tried to end my life by jumping in a dark pool, but instead of killing me, I became part Grimm, making me who I am today. Salem explained in a harsh tone as her red eyes stared at the deities with loath and hatred. Many people present formed a "oh" for their mouths as it does explain why she looked like a Grimm but was still human in both appearance and behavior. I see now. Have you finally understood the error of your ways after all this time? The god of light asked her inquisitively. Harry's eyes narrowed at those two but especially at the yellow deity, knowing that it was him who cursed Salem in the first place. Of the two deities, it was the one he disliked the most. The purple god was just an idiot who followed what his brother tell him. Salem opened her mouth to answer, but someone beat her to it as he literally jumped on his feet to approach the gods. She didn't, my lord. Following your departure of Remnant, this woman had killed thousands of people and some had silver eyes. Ojben said as he bowed in front of the two deities. Those words caused many to look at Rwby with surprise as the young girl looked at the headmaster in shock. Not only that, but she has been plotting on killing you both. The twin gods, despite not having eyes, were clearly disappointed by those words. Even without eyes, the feeling itself radiated from their bodies and everyone present could scent it. The creatures of Grimm, despite liking dark emotions, whimpered again as they backed away from the clearly displeased deities. Is that so? The god of light inquired Ojben with a calm tone, but we could clearly detect the undertone of anger in this voice. Yes, my lord. Not long ago, she has told everyone that you were nothing but tyrants and not gods. The headmaster of Beacon answered the yellow god with a firm nod along with a glare addressed toward Salem. Harry's eyes narrowed when he saw the smallest god clenching his fists in clear anger. The young man readied himself in case one of the two beings tried anything. Look like we have put too much faith in her, brother, the purple-colored deity said to his brother somberly. It seems like it, brother, the god of light answered his kin before looking back at the Queen of Grimm. We thought that cursing you with immortality would teach you the true orders of things. The mortals must always respect their creators and have entire faith in them, but it seems it was useless, the yellow-colored began to say in a solemn tone before pausing when the Queen of Grimm snarled in anger. Human beings and faunus kind have the right to decide their own fate. None of them, us, are objects for you to use at your convenience. Some people present nodded their heads in agreement at those words. Ojben was not among them. Even those who were wary of the Queen of Grimm were in agreement. The god of darkness snorted loudly in both disbelief and clear disdain as he said those words. Humanity exists because my brother created them. The least they can do is to serve their betters. Harry's eyes narrowed dangerously as he glared dagger at the smallest god. The way he was talking reminded him of a pompous brat he had to deal with when he was human, Draco F. Malfoy. But what did they do instead? They oppose us. No, they challenged us. The god of darkness snarled the next words with anger and the Grimm backed away further. The defenders of Beacon minus Harry and Ojben backed away as well, no wanting to suffer their wraths. You might have created them, but you have no right to take them their free will. Salem hissed back at the gods, red eyes narrowed in anger. Free will? They don't have one. They aren't supposed to have one. Sure, they were made to put more life on this world, but they were made to serve us. The god of light loudly said from his place. The anger was so easy to detect that the people of Remnant minus Salem and Harry all backed away in fear. But many then started to feel angry at those beings who literally said they were nothing but slaves to them. I have seen my fair share of pompous BSTRDS, but the both of you managed to surpass them all. Harry couldn't retain himself from snarling in anger from his place. The gods, like everyone present, turned their heads to stare at him. His friends all looked at him with shock and a bit of amazement, the teachers looked horrified while the others looked stunned. Blanche, the pretty white wolf fauness, was looking at the love of her life with nothing but horror, shock and fear as her yellow eyes looked at him. Who are you, boy, to talk like this to your betters? The god of darkness hissed at our hero with disdain and anger. Someone who value free will above anything else. Harry snarled at the purple god before adding with a sneer. You present yourselves as gods, but all I see before me are pathetic son of bees with really big heads. Gasps of shock echoed from the crowd as the defenders all looked at him with shock and horror. Why? Because he literally and openly insulted gods. Ashben looked at his student with wide eyes of shock while Salem looked amused by the whole situation as she crossed her arms under her bust with a pleasant smile on her pale face. How dare you? The god of light snarled with nothing but fury in his tone as beside him, his brother was shivering in growing anger. Oh, did I somehow broke your pathetic egos? You poor things, you better get used to it because I don't plan to stop. Harry said mockingly at first before sneering the last part. New waves of shock from the crowd as they all stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Harry, stop. Do you have a dead wish or something? Mr. Potter, that's enough. But the young man ignored everyone and everything as his emerald green eyes were locked on the two gods who were seething in anger and fury at being mocked. You better listen to your friends, boy, if you know what's good for you. The god of darkness snarled in restrained anger. F you, god of junk. Harry snarled at the purple deity with hidden satisfaction. He didn't show it, but internally, Harry felt great. It felt really good to insult BSTRDS like the ones he was facing. You challenge me, mortal? The god of darkness. The purple brother snarled as he looked at him. You bet your I do. Harry snarled back while readying his weapons. Then you will die by my hands. The god of darkness snarled as he extended an arm toward the offender while readying a ball of energy in his hand. Bring it on, jackass. Harry taunted him with a smirk as he clanked his swords together. Hey! The two turned their heads to look at where the cry came from and saw Blanche stepping forward with a glare that scared many people present. I won't let you hurt the man I love. The faunus snarled to the god of darkness. Yeah. No one touch our friends. Rwby cried out in agreement as a look of determination passed through her silver eyes. Friends sticks together. John's voice echoed in the air as he glared at the gods, his weapons at the ready. Yeah, every single teenagers cried out in agreement while the adults looked stunned at first before slowly joining them. Ashben looked at them with disbelief clear on his face. Salem looked also surprised, but a smile was gracing her face as she shot a sideway glance toward Harry, who looked completely taken aback by this. What of the gods? In short, they were angry, really angry, no furious. Are you really opposing us? The god of light asked loudly in anger and surprise. We would face everything for our friends. Young responded while readying her gauntlets. Behind the blonde brawler, many people nodded their heads in agreement. Fools! As punishment for defying your betters, you will be destroyed. The god of darkness snarled in anger as a large ball of energy formed in his hands. However, before he could launch it, two voices echoed in the air. You won't touch our daughters. Everyone turned their heads toward the east where a portal appeared. From it, stepped out 4 people, 2 women and 2 men. The first woman looked like a carbon copy of a certain brawler we love but older and with black hair instead of blonde and red eyes instead of lilac. Her attire consisted of a V-neck black and red wrap-style top with a black pleated skirt that has black shorts underneath, with series of beaded necklaces. She also had a red obi sash around her waist alongside a red tassel wrapped around her waist where we could see her weapon in its sheath. Attached to was a long black object that is either fur or feathers, with a red and white bandana-like stuff hanging from behind her. Her forearms were covered by armored gauntlets that protruded outwards and black fingerless gloves. Finally, she was wearing black mid-thigh high boots with red splatter patterns and black heels. The first man caught every girl's attention. He looked to be 7 feet tall and seemed to be in his early 30s, with raven black swept hair, flaring emerald green eyes and a well-trimmed beard. The man looked to be really well-built and muscular. His outfit consisted of a silver scratched-up chest plate along with a large black cape clasped together with ornaments that looked like skulls. He also wore black pants and a pair of bracers were fastened to his arms while white gloves hid his hands. Then, as if it wasn't enough, the guy wore what looked like black boots. The second man had blonde hair with 2 small strands sticking out from the top and blue eyes. On his right arm was a tattoo which resembles a heart. He was wearing brown cargo shorts with a dark brown belt, black shoes, a red bandana on his left arm and a brown leather vest over a tan dress shirt with the right sleeve cut off. On his clothes was an armor consisted of a metal spalder, leather vambrace and a brown fingerless glove all on his right arm. The last woman looked like a carbon copy of Rwby but older with shoulder-length hair tied back in a half-up/half-down style and wore a hooded cloak which is white outside and red underneath. Under that cloak is a similar outfit to her daughter's but mostly black, a high-neck décolletage blouse with studded wristbands on the arms, a black and white overbust corset, a skirt with white tulle underneath, grey leggings, and black knee-high boots with red soles. It was the last woman that shocked the others because not only she looked like one of the students but also because her body looked a bit translucent. You could literally see through her. Summer. Ojben, Crow, Glinda and the rest of the Beacon staff all cried out in disbelief as they saw the ghostly woman. Salem was shocked to see the transparent figure of someone she fought against a long time ago and secretly glanced at Harry who merely raised an eyebrow at her. "Mom/mommy." Young and Rwby cried out at the same time as their eyes landed on the woman in question. "My babies!" Summer cried out as she rushed toward her girls before hugging them. Rwby instantly melted and hugged her mother back, crying loudly in happiness with her older sister soon joining in even if her eyes were locked on the other woman who came alongside Summer. The woman was giving her a look that seemed to say, "Later," and Young nodded her head at her before hugging Summer back. "Mom," she whispered softly and was rewarded with a kiss on the forehead. "Shh, I'm here girls, I'm here," Summer cooed to both Rwby and Young as they looked at her with tears of happiness in their eyes. Blake, Weiss, Team JNPR along with Gyra, Callie and some other people were watching the reunion with warm smiles on their faces. It was really cute after all. "How is this possible?" Glinda asked softly in shock and stupor as her green eyes looked at the ghostly figure of Summer Rose. "We buried your body. How can you be here?" Crow asked loudly with narrowed eyes of suspicion. Ojben was unable to say a word as he looked at Summer Rose with wide eyes of shock. Summer looked away from her daughters to answer, "It's good to see you too Crow, you look old, are you still drunk?" "He is always drunk." Glinda, Ironwood, Peter and Oblek all cried out at the same time which caused Crow to glare at them. "Some things can never change," Summer muttered with amusement before looking at Rwby when her daughter spoke to her. "Mommy, why are you transparent?" "Because I'm a ghost sweetie," Summer replied to her youngest daughter with a maternal smile. "Cool." Rwby cried out softly with shining eyes. Summer and Young both looked at her with amusement before the latter asked the former. "But how is it possible? I saw your body you were—" The blonde brawler paused as memories of that fateful day resurfaced in her mind. "Death allowed me to temporarily visit the mortal plane," Summer said to Young in a calm and kind tone. You speak of death as a person, Ironwood commented from his place, still looking at Summer with a calculative look in his eyes. That's because he is, Raven said with a shrug as she stepped forward with a stern expression on her face. Ignoring the shocked looks created by her declaration, the woman's red eyes landed on one of the adults among the defenders of Beacon. "Hello sister," Crow greeted the woman with coldness. "Hello little brother," Raven greeted back with the same coldness. "Wait, you met death?" Peter asked her with curiosity. Instantly, many looked at Raven with interest shining in their eyes. "I did. It was frightening," the woman admitted with a shiver while glancing at the dark-haired man she came with. Speaking of which, the man in question looked toward Harry, who looked back at him dead in the eyes. They looked at one another for a moment before nodding their heads. "Who is he?" Ojban asked the newcomers carefully as he looked at the 7-feet-tall dark man. "None of your concern," the blond man answered the headmaster of Beacon coldly as he walked towards Summer and the girls. "Hey Dad." Rwby and Young greeted him with a smile, and another group hug took place afterwards. Blanche smiled at this before her yellow eyes landed on Harry and the still unknown dark man. The two looked a lot alike. Maybe they were related. From the murmurs among the other students of Beacon Academy, the White Wolf Faunus could say that many were thinking the same. "Hey you," Crow said while pointing at the dark man who lazily looked at the guy with boredom. "Yes. Who are you?" "My name's Hadrian Black, at least, in this form." Many blinked at the last words and narrowed their eyes at the man as suspicion and distrust could be seen on their faces. "What do you mean by that?" Glinda asked him with confusion while readying her writing CRP. "You will see," was Hadrian's response. Amber couldn't help but smirking at this answer as she glanced over at Harry, who had allowed a tiny smile on his face. Hadrian then turned his head to look at the gods with an expression of boredom on his face. "Never in my life, I have seen such huge piles of SHT. The man's words caused many to splutter in disbelief and shock while Harry merely laughed loudly with amusement. Salem herself had allowed chuckles to escape her mouth. Summer and Raven, along with Amber and Taeyang, all smirked at this, equally amused. The gods, them, were outraged by the lack of respects those mortals had showed them so far and had enough of it. "Now you have done it, mortal. Prepare yourself for your destruction." The god of darkness roared in fury as beside him, his brother looked just as furious. "Our destruction? Now, you mean your destruction?" Harry retorted with a dark shark-like grin on his face. The gods blinked in confusion at those words before laughing loudly with amusement. "Very funny, mortal. We can't be killed. We are gods." The god of light replied with a dismissive wave of his hands. "All things die, even the gods," Harry said in a deep and calm tone before looking at Salem. "It is time," he told her simply, and she nodded at him in understanding. "Time for what?" Weiss asked him loudly in confusion, and around her, everyone seemed just as confused as the heiress. However, Harry ignored her as his emerald eyes turned to look at one person in particular, Amber. "You know there is no turning back," the Fall Maiden told him in a soft tone, but everyone could hear her clearly. "Yes, I know," Harry replied in an equal tone before looking away from Amber to look at the stunned face of Blanche Moonflower. "Blanche, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love and will always love you. I'm sorry for hiding this from you and to everyone here." Those words caused Blanche to look at him with confusion, especially at the last part. "I love you," Harry repeated to her before cracks appeared on his face. Gasps of shock and horror echoed from the crowd as they watched not only Harry but Hadrian Black as well being covered in cracks before shattering like glasses. The pieces fell on the ground before turning into mist. Screams of sorrow, pain and horror came out of Blanche's mouth as she looked at the spot where Harry James Potter once stood, as tears could be seen running down her cheeks. Rwby, her team along with all the people who knew the guy were equally pained by what had just happened. Pyrrha hugged John like no tomorrow, and the blonde was whispering to her gently. Rwby and Young hugged not only each other but their partners as well. Raven was staring at where the two disappeared with a stunned expression on his face, while Taeyang looked just as taken aback. Three people only didn't seem affected by what just occurred. Amber, why aren't you crying? Wasn't he your friend? Emerald asked her lover with confusion and shock. Indeed, the Fall Maiden wasn't shedding tears but instead strangely eager for something. He is still my friend M, and we are about to see the true him soon enough. At those words, many looked at Amber as if she had two heads. Blanche looked at her friend with confusion clear on her face and opened her mouth to ask her what she meant when everyone looked back at the gods when one of them started talking. A homunculus. How is it possible for me to not have felt it? The god of darkness loudly inquired in stupor as he looked at the spots where the people who insulted them disappeared. But who created it? A part of us too, no one has the power to create one. The god of light said not only to himself but his brother as well, his tone betraying his shock and curiosity. Hearing this, Salem and Summer along with Amber all smirked toothily in dark pleasure and anticipation. The Queen of Grimm then opened her mouth to say, "Are you sure about that? Because I know who did this." The gods, along with everyone present, turned their heads to stare at her with curiosity. "Oh. And who might that be?" the god of darkness inquired her with a sneer. Salem's smirk grew predatory at those words as her red eyes shined a bit in anticipation. "He is the one who allowed me to return in the mortal plane," Summer began to say before Amber took over, much to the surprise of many. "He is the one who helped me getting out of my comatose state." Emerald winced a bit at that but stood strong. "He is the only one who might go on par with you both and whose power can match, or even surpass, yours." The Queen of Grimm took over with a calm tone before adding with a shark-like grin. "After all, only a god can fight another god. There are no other gods than us." The god of darkness hissed in disbelief and disdain while his brother nodded in agreement. "Are you sure about that?" a deep masculine voice echoed in the air. The voice radiated raw power. Everyone tensed as a few seconds after those words were said, the air itself started to become colder and darker just as shadows started to spread from every part of the area. The sky itself turned darker in color. The creatures of Grimm all fled the area with their tails between their legs, whimpering in pure terror. "What about our friends?" They were frozen in place with expression of terror on their faces minus Amber, Summer and Salem. "Look!" Blake called out as she pointed at something. Following her fingers, they saw a large cloud of mist and shadow slowly appearing from the ground. Everyone watched with wide eyes of fright as someone appeared through it. It was a really tall and handsome man, around 12 feet tall, who looked to be in his 20s with long messy black hair that reached down his back and a nice figure. His eyes were closed as if he was sleeping or ignoring the people present. But what had really caught their attention was the strange armor he was wearing. It was both appealing and intimidating in appearance. That and his size, everyone could see that he literally towered anyone present. From the man, radiated nothing but darkness, coldness and power. The twin gods themselves could feel it and couldn't help but shivering a bit. "Allow me to present you the one who helped me to recover all 4 relics, the embodiment of death himself, Thanatos." Salem's proclaimed loudly with a smirk as she looked at everyone present. Just as those words escaped her lips, Thanatos' eyes suddenly opened, revealing bright neon green fires that caused many to pale drastically as the temperature turned even colder. A perfect silence could be heard in the air as everyone present, including the twin gods themselves, looked at the newcomer with various emotions: shock, stupor, amazement. But the most notorious one was fear. Not a simple fear but pure, primal, ancestral fear. It was normal in a sense, as every living creatures from the tiny ants from the enormous whales feared death in some way. Humans and faunus were no different in that regard. The defenders of Beacon along with Taeyang and Raven minus Amber all stared at Thanatos with pale faces and wide eyes of fear. The faunus particularly looked affected as many were seen shivering madly in fright. Blanche, for her part, looked at the man with not only shock and fear but also surprise. He looked like an older version of the man she loved but younger than Hadrian Black. Her mind was still processing the fact Harry was deaf. The white wolf fauness wanted to speak to him, maybe berating him for not telling her but couldn't because she was terrified of him at the moment and maybe because he didn't look to be in a good mood. Somewhere, hidden from view, a group of reporters were looking at the scene with wide eyes of shock and fright as one of them, the cameraman, was recording the scene. Everyone on Remnant, thanks to this, could clearly see what was happening, and needless to say that the appearance of Death himself shocked and scared more than one, even if some females were commenting about his good looks. Anyway, back to Vale. Ashbin, who was laying on the ground, stared at the newcomer with nothing but terror in his eyes, as deep down he was just as shocked as everyone else. Well, almost everyone else. Salem, Summer and Amber looked at the embodiment of death with smiles on their faces. "My lord," the Queen of Grimm greeted him respectfully with a small bow. Thanatos nodded his head in greetings, allowing a small smile on his face. "Lord Thanatos," Summer greeted him in equal respect while bowing her head in deference, much to the shock of her daughters. Another nod and a tiny smile. "Hey Thanatos." Amber, happily waved him from her seat, causing many people to stare at her in disbelief at how she was acting to Death himself. However, much to their shock, the man in question merely chuckled in amusement before looking back at the Fall Maiden with a kind look on his face. "It's good to see you, Amber, properly at least," Thanatos said in a gentle tone which caused everyone to blink in surprise. None of them expected Death to be able to speak in such a way. Well, many never expected to see Death anyway, as many people assumed he was just a concept and no a person. Turning away from his sister in all but BLD, the embodiment of Death turned his head at the gods, his warm smile turning into a dead serious one as his slitless eyes narrowed dangerously. The air suddenly turned even colder and everyone shivered at this, knowing that the newcomer was no more in a good mood. Fortunately, no one present was the target of his wrath except for the gods, who stiffened the second the incarnation of Death looked at them. "We finally meet at last," Thanatos' deep and cold voice echoed throughout the area, scaring the people who heard it. So it seems, the God of Light was the first one to regain his composure. His tone was calm and composed, but we could clearly detect the interest and curiosity in it. "Who are you?" The God of Darkness asked him with steel in his tone as he glared at Thanatos. The embodiment of Death smirked darkly, scaring the hell out of some of the people present, before answering. "I thought it was said, but I will indulge you. I am Oblivion. I am the end of all things, I am the darkness, I am Death." Thanatos' voice seemed to echo even louder at the last word as the windows shattered despite not being close to the embodiment of Death. Some of the Elysian soldiers, along with some of the White Fang thugs, fainted at the power radiating from the man-no creature standing a few feet away from them all. Creature who spoke barely a second later. And I don't mean it metaphorically, or rhetorically, or poetically, or theoretically, or any other fancy way. I am Death straight up. Once again, everyone shivered in fear as the words echoed throughout the area. The man's eyes seemed to look directly through them to their very souls. Rwby started to shiver in fear as she pressed herself against her mother and sister. Pyrrha did the same with John, who was sweating profusely. Emerald, was shaking uncontrollably as she looked at the being in front of her. While she had already met him and forgiven him for killing Cinder, the green-haired thief was still dead afraid of him. Seeing this, Amber gently pulled her into a comforting hug. The beacon staff and Ashbin looked ready to wet themselves as they looked at the man with pure natural fear. Ironwood was anything but his normal self, as he was sweating a lot and as pale as a ghost. However, we could see the fascination in his eyes. Gyra and Callie were equally watching the scene with shock as they stood close to Blake, whose yellow eyes were still locked on the creature currently looking at the gods. "And I've come for you both," Thanatos announced with a steel-like tone as his eyes narrowed again at the twin gods. But why?" The God of Light asked him shakily but still firmly while his brother sneered at him. "Why? Because you tampered with Death, you gave something that wasn't yours to give, and maybe because you slaughtered people for opposing you." Thanatos' response was sharp and filled with a controlled amount of anger. "You dare to lecture us?" The God of Darkness snarled at him with anger and frustration. "Yes," was the embodiment of Death's answer. The answer was deadly cold and caused many to shiver in fear at how cold it sounded. Just who do you think you are for talking to us like that? We are gods. You are nothing. The purple deity cried out in clear rage. Thanatos' eyes narrowed even more at the smaller god, but his expression remained composed and calm, which scared everyone even more. You know, you remind me right now of a child throwing a pamper tantrum, the embodiment of death stated with a hint of humor in his tone. Salem, Summer and Amber all snorted in amusement, and some snickers could be heard from the crowds. Even the Ice Queen of Team Rwby had allowed a chuckle to escape her lips. The god Light reluctantly nodded in agreement, as his brother was indeed acting like a child right now. What of the god of darkness? He was livid. Growling at the creature in front of him, the purple deity lunged forward with a cry of anger. Thanatos, seeing this, smirked. Looked like Salem was right about the god of darkness being a temperamental guy. Slowly, the embodiment of death extended an arm forward, his right one, pointing it at the charging deity before opening his palm. Everyone watched as a purple ball of energy formed in the palm of his hand. Pathetic was the only thing the embodiment of death said as he looked at the charging deity. Without warning, the ball shot out of Thanatos' hand before rushing toward the god of darkness, who didn't have the time to dodge as the ball reached him. The purple deity's cries echoed in the air as he was soon engulfed in a purple light, hiding him from view. Brother! The god of light cried out in alarm and concern for his younger sibling. Salem, the second the ball connected with the purple deity, cried out in equal pain. Why? Because of her connection with the god of darkness through her grim part. It allowed her to feel his pain, his agony. He is in pain. The Queen of Grim cried out in pure joy despite feeling like she was being burned from the inside. Thanatos glanced at her with a smirk before refocusing back on the large purple ball where the god of darkness was in. A few seconds later, the ball dissipated and the familiar form of the purple deity fell heavily on the ground. Impossible. The god of light cried out in shock when he saw his brother's state. Many gasped in shock by what they saw. The god of darkness' body was covered with bruises and bumps. The purple deity in pain as he laid there on his back, his arms and legs twitching from time to time. Do you have enough yet? Thanatos asked him coldly, not at all caring by the god of darkness' state. I will kill you, the purple god began to say with clear pain as he slowly went back on his legs. Thanatos merely smirked at him as he said back, I would love to see you try. Enough. The god of light's sudden cry stopped both of them from doing or saying anything more. Thanatos raised an eyebrow at the yellow god while the guy's brother turned his rammed head to stare at him. I don't know who you are and what this woman told you, the god of light began to say while glancing at Salem before resuming. But I can tell you that we were in our own rights. In your own rights? Thanatos repeated with narrowed eyes. Yes. Millenniums ago, the mortals decided to defy the natural order of things, the weak must serve the strong. Me and my brother just punished them for their insolence. The god of light explained calmly to the embodiment of death. And by this you mean the mortals must serve the gods, Thanatos concluded in a neutral tone. Yes, was the yellow god's answer. A long silence punctuated those words as Thanatos closed his eyes as if deep in thoughts. The god of light, seeing this, instantly went to help his brother who was glaring at the embodiment of death with pure hatred. You are truly despicable, Thanatos began to say with a cold tone as he slowly looked back at the brother. The people present all stiffened when they saw the rage shining in those bright neon eyes, and Salem herself took a few steps back in fear. Those of powers are supposed to use to protect the weak, but you use it to control them. The embodiment of death didn't raise his voice, but despite this, everyone were now terrified of him. You used your powers to enslave innocent people, then stole their right to live. Everyone could hear the rage emanating from the embodiment of death as his eyes brightened even more with power. You think opposing you is a crime? You see mortals as servants who should do everything you told them to. Everyone were now shivering in fear as they all took a few steps backwards. If I follow your logic, mortals wanting to think by themselves is a crime? At the question, Thanatos' body became nothing but a huge shadow, and the only thing we could see were his eyes, which were now two bright green flames. "Who do you think you are?" the embodiment of death asked them with fury as his neon green eyes glared at them. The ground seemed to shook violently at the words just as the air turned colder. The people present all shivered with nothing but pure fear at death's wrath, and the two gods themselves stiffened in fright, but before they could answer, Thanatos spoke again. "Let me tell you one thing, in your eyes, mortals may be insignificant insects, but even insects are living beings." Salem, Summer and Amber all looked at the embodiment of death with approval, while the other people present minus Ojban all whispering their agreement, and some could be seen looking at Thanatos with smiles on their faces. It was heartwarming to see such a powerful being caring so much for people far weaker than them. Blanche putted a hand on her heart as she looked at Thanatos with a smile on her face. She swore she saw him glancing at her direction during his little speech. Then the embodiment of death took a step forward, the sound of his stomp echoed throughout the area and shook the ground a bit. Ignoring the shivers from the mortals, Thanatos' eyes were fully on the two brothers. "I will take great pleasure in ending both of your existence," he roared in anger as he raised his arms above his head, forming a X with his hands. Between his hands, formed another ball of purple energy, but a bit larger than the precedent one. "But I will not kill you yet, you must suffer first," the embodiment of death said with sadistic glee as he thrusted his hands down, pointing them at the gods. Cries of agony and pain echoed again in the air as the twin gods found themselves engulfed in the massive purple ball sent to them by their enemy. The god of light had never been in so much pain before now, and this shocked the hell out of him. Once the massive ball of energy dissipated, the two deities heavily fell on the ground, their bodies covered with bruises and bumps. The brothers painfully used their arms to rose from the ground. Thanatos glared down at them, his form still looking like a living shadows with shining eyes, before raising a hand in the air, the left one. Salem, the embodiment of death, called out calmly but sternly. "Yes, my lord." The Queen of Grimm shakily asked him. "Can you remind me who destroyed humanity?" he asked her calmly while not looking away from the two brothers. "The god of darkness," Salem answered with a small bow of her head. Nodding at the Queen of Grimm, Thanatos looked back at the two gods only to blink when a large ball of energy headed toward him. Instead of dodging it, the embodiment of death only smirked before letting himself being consumed by the attack. "My lord! Harry!" He could hear people crying out not only his title but the name he took as a human. He recognized it as the people he befriended at Beacon Academy through his clone Harry James Potter. Once the ball disappeared, people gasped when they saw nothing. Thanatos was no more there. Salem, along with Amber, fell on their knees in disbelief. Blanche also fell on her knees, staring at the spot the embodiment of death previously stood. Rwby, her teammates, and everyone else who were close to Harry were equally taken aback. "He was strong but not strong enough, it seems," the god of darkness said with a sneer on his face as he was standing on his feet with an arm aimed toward where Thanatos were. "He was the one who sent this attack and looked to be proud of it. It seems so, brother, but I wonder why he didn't dodged it," the god of light said softly to himself while looking at the large crater with suspicion. "Who cares? With him out of the way, we can now teach Rwby why we are here for." The purple god said with a shrug as he turned his attention toward the mortals who all glared at him except Ojban. "Very well, we shall. What the god of light began to say calmly before shouting the last part as he looked toward the crater with disbelief. His brother along with everyone present turned their heads toward there as well, only to stare in shock at what they saw. At first, it was faint, but then slowly, something was beginning to be more and more visible to soon reveal an unharmed embodiment of death who had a smug look on his face. "Through it was cowardly to attack me like this. I have to admit this attack was pretty impressive. I didn't saw it coming." How can you still be alive?" The god of darkness spluttered in denial, shock and fear as he looked at the embodiment of death. Thanatos, instead of responding, rushed forward with such speed that even Rwby was left in shock. The purple god didn't have the time to react when he suddenly found himself being held up by the neck, lifted from the ground. "I am death, I cannot die unlike you," Thanatos answered with a toothy smirk as he held the god of darkness by the throat. The purple god opened his mouth to speak, either to demand his release or something else, but the embodiment of death ignored him completely as he used his other arm to punch the guy in the guts. Groaning in pain, the god of darkness found himself tossed away by the embodiment of death's grip before crashing against a building. Many winced as they saw the wall literally being destroyed by the impact. While the purple deity slowly appeared through the debris, Thanatos then raised a finger before pointing it as the god of darkness. Seeing this, the god of light lunged forward with a cry, "No!" However, he didn't went far as he suddenly found himself being restrained by purple chains that appeared out of nowhere. "Stand down," Thanatos told him coldly before refocusing back on the purple brother, his finger still pointed at him. "For ending the lives of thousands of innocents by arrogance, I, Thanatos, sentence you to death at the hands of the tortured souls of the inferno. So mote it be." At the last words, odd green-shaped ring-like circles escaped his finger before going straight toward the god of darkness who was now fully out of the debris of the wall. The purple deity blinked as he found himself surrounded by the circles but then looked down at horror as he saw pale humanoid figures sprouting out of the ground. "Get away from me!" The god of darkness shouted in anger and fear as some of those figures grabbed him with their hands, dragging him down toward the strange dark pool they came from. The mortals watched with wide eyes as they saw some of the tortured souls biting the purple god, tearing his flesh with their teeth. The god of light tried to escape the chain but it was futile and he was forced to watch as his brother tried to push his attackers away. But it was futile as he was slowly but surely dragged down further into the pool. Soon, only his head and shoulders were still outside but because of the hands holding them, it won't be for long. "No. I can't die like this. I am the god of Noo." The purple deity began to shout loudly in panic before screaming in agony as the hands dragged him fully into the pool. Then the pool brightened in a purple light which caused everyone to quickly turn their heads away to avoid being blinded by it. They stood like this for a minute before it was safe again to look. Much to their shock, the pool had disappeared to be replaced by a strange symbol on the ground, a vertical line and circle enclosed by a triangle. Silence. Everyone was looking at the spot the god of darkness disappeared with shock and amazement. Ojban looked horrified by what just happened as he looked back and forth between the symbol and the embodiment of death. Salem looked overjoyed and looked at Thanatos with a bright smile on her face. Summer looked solemn as she stood near her daughters and her husband and Raven. Team Rwby and Team JNPR were, in short, amazed by what they saw, and the same could be said for every single person present. Except one. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 7. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.